Good evening, everyone. I'll give you all just a quick moment to find your seat as I gaze off into the distance. Thank you all so very much for joining us here tonight. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the McNally Robinson Booksellers is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji, Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson is located on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here today to celebrate the publication of Diagnosing Minor Illness in Children, the long-awaited and absolutely incredible new book of poetry from Kerry Ryan. I'd like to start off by offering a note of gratitude to Frontenac House for publishing this book in the first place and for making this evening possible. You all look like a very trustworthy crowd, so I feel comfortable admitting that I am a big fan of Kerry's work. And I've been looking forward to this collection for a very long time, and it absolutely did not disappoint. It's an incredible book. I'm in the middle of my second read through of it right now, and I very much agree with Sarah Tang, author of Grappling Hook, who on the back of the book beautifully writes, Kerry Ryan's poems express the feral intensity of motherhood, complex, joyous, heartrending, and all-consuming. Her writing is honest and beautiful. Read it and read it again, and know what it is to live in this animal love. It's a beautifully visceral book that finds such incredibly, it takes such small images, such small experiences, and blows them up to the universal in such a subtle and at the same time, well, feral way, as mentioned twice in the pull quotes on the back. So one should be forewarned before we dig into these poems tonight. But I won't ramble too much. I did want to just express how incredible this book is before I go over some of the details of this evening. So there will be a reading from Kerry up at the front here. I'll then return to introduce your host for the evening, following which there'll be a conversation at these two stools to my left. After the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So if you're physically located here in the space, please just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with a microphone, which is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those watching at home can actually hear your question in the first place. If you are one of those fine folks joining us on YouTube, please just feel free to write any questions or comments you might have in the chat, and we'll make sure that they get to Kerry. But for right now, and the only other thing I will put in your brain at this exact moment is following the event itself, we'll ask you all to remain seated for just one moment while we safely transport Kerry to a signing table, which is located just beside the cash desk. I'll have more thrilling details about signing procedure for you at the close of the event. But for now, Kerry Ryan has previously published 2 books of poetry, The Sleeping Life, which is published by the Muses Company, and Verses, which is published by Anvil. The latter was a finalist for the Acorn Plantos Award for People's Poetry. Her poems and essays have appeared in journals and anthologies across Canada. In 2022, she was shortlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize. She lives and writes in Winnipeg and is here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Kerry Ryan.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. You all look so great. Thanks for coming. It's nice to see so many faces out there. This book has been a long time in the making, and I have lots of thank yous to say. First and foremost, Frontenac Press for publishing this book. It was rejected many times before they said yes. I got a call out of the blue last June from the fellow who became my editor, John Wall Barger, to say that he wanted to publish my book of poems about motherhood. Here was a fellow who had no experience in breastfeeding or nipple damage or any of it, and the book really spoke to him. So just so grateful to him and everyone at Frontenac for putting it out and turning it into such a beautiful object that now I can hold in my hands. Thank you so much to McNally's for hosting tonight, and to you, John, for being so organized and keeping it all together. To Ariel Gordon, who you'll be hearing from for a moment, who is my good writing friend, and I'm so appreciative of you for being here tonight. To my family for being here, and to all my friends, and some people that I don't know that are here. It's just so nice to feel so well received. So this is a book that's primarily about motherhood. It's also about midlife. There's some other themes that weave through, but I'm going to start with some baby poems. As John pointed out, there's a few, recurring words that you'll hear, but this poem is called Feral. Hospital silence, metal on bone, moaning linoleum. Two bluebirds sew up my meaty flaps, doctors squirming pinky tests stitches. Wolf pup shoved to breast, gnaws blind, fuzzed muzzle, tufted ears, dark pelt. Plastic bracelet circling forepaw names her mine. Antiseptic bassinet, no habitat for a wild one, crying for black silk night. I've always shied from furred things, dacnophobia, fear of being bitten. She sniffs this on my fingertips. Breasts latticed with scratches, nipples mauled fruit. Wild animals reared by humans ought to suckle from a rubber glove. Wolf pup is brave, marks me as territory, converts me, nocturnality, pack mentality. My scent turns animal, blood chunk, dribbled piss. I lick her eyes open. We howl at the fluorescent moon. This next poem is called Baby Book. I didn't make a baby book for my daughter. This is your baby book, Scout. You're welcome. I log contents of every diaper, minutes spent at each breast, your appetite a starred review. No milestones, just meticulous, ridiculous columns, profit, loss, as if one day you might audit me, might see me, nipple hanging by hinge of skin over rippled Lalesh League pages. See me working shit into pattern, boiling the meat off this thing to count its bones. Am I gonna have to separate you two? Or you two? It's okay. Latching. You claim the right, the fat one. Shot with blue lightning, you dig every finger. Tongue pumping nipple, slow swallow to sleep. My hand spans your rib cage, clockwork ticking. No geometry round as your cheek, no thread count is fine. Suck slackens, I'm soaked in a warm spill of trust. Your small hands, meadow anemone, blooming. When you're maybe a mother at any stage, but certainly when you're a new mother, you are expected to know everything about your child and everything about any potential medical condition they might have, and to be able to report on it very clearly to anybody who might be asking. Diagnosing minor illness in children. Rank cough on a scale. 1 is lizard whisper, 10 is marching band tuning up. Expectoration, example, colorful magician's handkerchiefs tied corner to corner. What wattage the fever and how measured? Axillary, oral, tympanic, rectal, untrained palm to brow? Which phrase best describes the rash? A, prickly pink stars, finely scattered. B, Bridal bouquet unraveled morning after. C, raspberry jam advancing. Using color wheel, create palette encompassing all recent stools. Construct a 3D model to demonstrate consistency. Is the skin broken? The spirit oozing? Evidence of a foreign body? Is the recent sleep pattern A, damask, B, paisley, C, demented blue-red checkerboard behind closed eyes? When did the respondent last close her eyes? One of the other themes sort of wound through this book is nature, and particularly the intersection of humans and technology with the natural world, which is something I've been thinking about and writing about a little bit lately. And I don't know if any of you might have heard the news story about this eagle from Russia or Asia that has blown like really far off course and has been hanging out in North America, just flying around up and down the coastline for a couple of years now. I kind of see myself in this creature, and you know, being in middle age and suddenly kind of looking around and you're like, where am I? Where am I going? How did I get here? To the stellar sea eagle, so very, very lost. 7,500 kilometers from your flyway, shouldered off course by an errant gust, hormonal glitch. A blip that doesn't rattle you. You're not some flimsy songbird. You're brute, used to pushing the sky back into place. You turn again, overcorrecting the span of an ocean, length of a continent, and then the stars are not where they should be. Your conservation status, vulnerable, a word that doesn't suit such massive wingspan, glowering eye. Lost, says Audubon, like you're a candidate for self-improvement. Backyard birders, follow your hashtag, chase a glimpse of your staggering miscalculation as you pace brine trail of bald eagles, grab salmon, moving and moving and moving on. Reindeer cyclone. Drone video, hypnotic mandala of antler, fur, clockwise swirl on my computer screen. Fawns insulated at the hub from wolves sniffing off camera. Lulled by precision of herd instinct, we ascribe strength, dogged defense to concentric circles. But on the ground, we'd recognize guttural sobs, whites of rolling eyes. Choreographed panic, a mind's worry circuit carved by hooves. This poem is for Jopi. There's a lot of birds in this book and in my life, and a lot of owls, and this is one of those poems. Birding by proxy. You, night-eyed, stoic, have always found kin in the highest branches. Rumors of owls abound, shadowy sightings, but you are unrequited, following raptor tips on Twitter, slumping home without photo. You need an owl the way I need sun. Spring evening, I sprint home, giddy with the gift smuggled in my throat. Regurgitate the hoot I picked up along riverbank. I hear how goofy it sounds, bad accent, clumsy fake, but you make the ID and kiss me. Guardian heart. When Leonard Cohen died, you broke the news gingerly, knowing I'd bruise. Gathered my flash flood in your sternum. Our dinner guests tiptoed home. I twisted inward, Always believed he'd kiss my hand. Unholy mix of blood brother, paramour. Last time I saw him, he skipped onto the stage of a hockey arena. My 6-week-old daughter was in noise-canceling headphones on my chest. Buried before I knew he was dead. By then, so many had claimed my intimate wound. When my father died, you answered our daughter's looping bedtime questions. I hadn't explained why he slept in a chair that hummed him up to standing. I'd switched on Paw Patrol to distract her from the ambulance. It was wet and muddy when we buried his packaged ashes. You carried our girl on your shoulders through the churchyard so her party shoes wouldn't be ruined. This is a poem for Jackie. Sound. My friend sends her dog's obituary. Just another email titled Sad News I've read or sent this year. A dog named Sound, but I never heard her bark. Kept her snout to herself, unbothered by canine insecurities or assholes. I see the slim husky everywhere now, ghost diamond of her face. That familiar wash of false relief, not dead, accounting error, mistaken ID. A sled dog rescue, she never dreamed of straying, but when I'd run with her, I'd hold her leash too tight, the way I do with everyone. The driver insisted death was instant, as one does, trying to spare us the fangs of it. I'm going to head back into parenting territory for my last few poems. Umbilical. In pink plastic Christmas skates, she lies on the ice a half hour, outrage puckering mutely around the word mummy. I taste salt, count digital minutes until she shuffles off the rink, grimly clutching a stranger's leg. I remember the brusque delivery nurse sorting the still warm mess of my placenta, the umbilical cord too short, she said, like a knitted scarf I hadn't bothered to complete. The time we skated together, my daughter saw no difference between my slumped ankle shame and the elegant cursive of the other mothers. Our relentless orbit, all her weight in my hands, my back rusted double so she wouldn't know falling. This is a poem for anyone who has been to the Hecla Island Resort water slide, and it is a warning to those of you who have not. Water slide. It will never be enough to wave as she mounts the stairs, count the rusty bolts that hold the thing together, and await her delivery on a tide of chlorinated elation. The parent of an only child must launch into the void. Any mother will spill her badge of honor birth story, how many times she almost died, but no one tells you this water slide is a throat closing in. Halfway down, you'll squeak to a stop, your own screams slapping your face. Can't climb back up that starless night, only dig forward with heels, hamstrings spasm, and you'll have to haul yourself hand over hand to shallows. And when you see the next mother in her sensible one piece, you will be too shaken to warn her. I'm going to read one last poem. This is the first poem in the collection, although I'm going to read it to close out the reading portion of tonight. I wrote this in the early days of the pandemic when my little family, like all of us, were locked in our houses and kind of spending a lot of time looking at each other, just thinking like, Who are these people? It's called known. Coordinates of each freckle, bullseye of ankle, lower back, 6th right intercostal. I've memorized fingerprints, pattern of fine hairs along upper lip, degree of nasolabial angle. But at 7, my daughter has begun to take on her own inscrutable form. Mouth overflowing with adult teeth and tones I don't recognize. Shades drawn where I used to peer directly in. She twists her long hair into a bun, a gesture I've never mastered, exposing the pale scruff where I carried her in my jaws. I'm just so grateful to you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I realize I have forgotten the introduction for tonight's host. But I realize I did neglect to mention just how incredibly funny this book is as well. And there are fist bump worthy bits of imagery on almost every page. So it is a really incredible read. Your host for this evening, Ariel Gordon, is a Winnipeg Treaty 1 territory-based writer, editor, and enthusiast. Her 5th book, Sightseeing, Writing Nature and Climate Change Across the Prairies, written in collaboration with Saskatchewan poet Brenda Schmidt, will be published by At Bay Press in fall 2023. Gordon's work has appeared recently in Canadian Notes and Queries, Canithus, or Canithius? Canthius, Periodicities, and the Quarantine Review, and is forthcoming in Free Fall and Grain as 2nd place winner of the Kloppenberg Hybrid Grain Contest. As always, Ariel and I are in the midst of a blood feud at the moment, but we've put that aside for Kerry's lunch tonight. But in keeping with tonight's theme of virality, I would encourage you not to look her directly in the eyes. Here to speak to Kerry, please join me in welcoming Ariel Gordon.
I'll get you, John Teves, and your little dog too. All right, Kerry. So I have a list of questions. So tell me about the pleasures and pitfalls around writing pregnancy and mothering, the child and the changed body.
Oh, okay, that's just a small, easy question to start off.
Just a meatball that I threw at you.
Yeah, so I've been writing this book over 10 years. The lifespan of my child, lots has changed over that time, but I guess I initially started writing a lot of these poems as a way of sort of record keeping, and just a way to kind of process what I was going through, like physically, and then just identity and all kinds of things that have happened. But so that was one piece of it, kind of as I was moving through this time. But I guess just thinking of challenges and that kind of thing, it's so interesting 10 years later, editing this book and looking back at some of those early poems. I must have written that, but it's hard to even remember it and to kind of get yourself back into that space of kind of desperateness and just that total sense of dislocation. And I don't know, getting back into all of that.
Now you wrote that one poem about logging all of the inputs and outputs. I found when my daughter was small, I actually was writing on those sheets, like little poems, because it was like the only paper that was like always next to me. Did you find yourself like changing how you wrote and when you wrote? Like, because you always had a child attached to you, skin on skin?
Yeah, well, kind of, in that like you really have to use those nap times, right? And they're short. So yeah, I guess the way I used my time changed a little bit. And of course, like the things I was writing about, because suddenly there was no other bigger world to be writing about. Your world is like so condensed and focused in that that's kind of all there was.
Did you feel like you had a choice to write about pregnancy and mothering? Like, did you feel like it was a choice, or were you compelled? Because I noticed with a lot of like male poets, they have children, and there might be one poem in their collection that a child runs through. But they don't feel as compelled to write about it. And I think partly that's because it's not as transformational for them, maybe. But
I think, I mean, for me, it was the only thing that was going on for a long time, but also I was just so mentally wrapped up in it and kind of needing to process it. And that's kind of the way I deal with the world or whatever might be happening is through writing, whether that's, you know, kind of this new identity stuff or like learning who somebody else is kind of thing. But yeah, I didn't really feel like it was a choice. It was also, I mean, it was low-hanging fruit, I guess, and then you're just in it all
Don't
the
talk
time.
about your breasts that way.
Okay.
Okay, so speaking of transformation, writers often talk about wanting to have like a transformational edit, right? Like an edit with someone where it's like the strongest relationship you have with something, and they find your book somehow and shape it for you, and it's like this amazing collaborative process. But it's not just like the poems or the manuscript that change. For me, what's transformed is the writer. And that's why it's so itchy and uncomfortable, like pregnancy and like early mothering, right? And we never expect it. And I remember you were texting me throughout the process and being like, I have to say this to someone.
I had,
you know,
moments.
But we all have those moments. And, you know, like, and the first response is always to be defensive or to like, you know, hate your poems.
Yeah.
But then you have to work through that process. So tell me about your editing process, like, and what it was like working with John Walton-Parger. So, who, as you say, writes differently and on different subjects than you do.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was initially just super, it just felt so great that here's somebody who, you know, was just like really passionate about my book. And, you know, after, you know, it's rejected a whole bunch of times and you kind of think, oh, this is only going to appeal to certain people, or maybe I just wrote it for myself. And then here's somebody who wants to publish it and wants to really engage in it and who read it so carefully. So, you know, starts off all great. And then, you know, then in this case, John started kind of like questioning some of my choices. I'm like, what do you mean? That's like, this is like my baby. You said it was good. You said you want to publish it. What's wrong with it now? And there was just a lot of back and forth where he was just really pushing me to look at the poems in a new way. And in some ways, like I was just so used to some of those poems were so old, I was just used to the way they sounded and used to the way they felt. And I was kind of in the comfort zone with them. So he really sort of pushed me beyond that comfort zone to a place where I could really pare away a lot of the
Baby fat.
Thank you. That's excellent. So many of the poems, and some of these poems have been published in other places, and they seem very different.
So
now.
they mostly get a lot shorter.
A lot shorter. Yeah, shorter line, fewer lines. Yeah, lots of baby fat on the ground or something.
Are there any, like, so, you know, often writers have like a reading copy, right? Like the copy of the book that they mark up and that they, you know, it's like a score for when you read sometimes, right? Like you mark where you want to pause and the words you want to make sure you hit and all that stuff. And sometimes, in my case, I find myself sometimes going back and adding the word that
the words that used to be there.
Then you think maybe should still be there.
Or kind of forgotten that you changed, like in the last stage. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't say what I thought it did. Yes, I found myself reaching back to some of those previous drafts for sure.
Yeah, but you know, they won't know unless they recorded your reading.
Or unless somebody's sitting there like,
yeah,
following along.
I was following.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's fun. And I was ready to correct you in case you missed a word.
And did I?
I won't say anything. Okay, so, oh God, I can't do that. Sorry. So theoretically, this is a book about mothering and the life of a middle-aged body, but the context, as you say, is equally important, right? So a climate change city awash with the more than human that lives alongside us. So, for instance, I just did a quick count as I was reading through the manuscript, like screech owls, doomed elms, robins, the stellar sea eagle, reindeer, sandhill cranes, outdoor cats, leashed and jacketed dogs, and foxes. And in the midst of that, you know, you have wildfire smoke, you have Dutch elm disease, you have the wellness movement, You have middle age, you have the birth of a child, and you have the death of a parent. I mean, are there any
I had a lot of
milestones you
stuff I
didn't
had to
hit?
fit in there. It's been a long time since I had a book. Sorry.
But you've been writing, and you've been writing on like she has not been doing other things. 2 novels at least, another poetry manuscript. You've been writing like stink this whole time.
Yeah, but not publishing. It's different.
Publishing journals all the time. And you were just shortlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize. And that poem didn't make it into this book because it wasn't good enough for this book.
It's not exactly true. It's not
That's
there.
what I'm saying.
But okay.
You can say what you're gonna say.
No, I was gonna say, what's your question?
Okay, wait. Okay, so what is the thing that makes you pay attention as a poet? Besides the baby with the alabaster skin and the dagger fingers. You know, like what is it that makes you pay attention to
I
it?
don't know what the thing is that makes me want to write about it. I'm always paying attention to the world. I like being in space. I like being outside. I like being in nature. So those things tend to stick with me. And those are things that tend to inspire me, I guess, when I'm writing, but I don't know what the things are always going to be that stick, you know, the little vignette almost that is going to become the piece of the poem. I don't even really know that at the time as I'm collecting, but I usually realize it, you know, once I go to my notebook and start thinking, oh, why am I like sort of ruminating on this one thing I saw, or this one news article, or this one video clip or something that I saw online. So usually once I'm like starting to write things down, I realize what I want to write about, but I'm almost kind of doing the gathering piece.
Are the urban nature and sort of climate focused pieces researched? Like, are all your poems researched, or are just those ones researched? I'm curious.
They're not even that researched. I mean, unless you count like a quick Google. So no, I don't really do. Well, sometimes I do. I mean, I guess it depends on whether I feel like I need to bulk up a piece. But usually it's just sort of my experience, my initial reaction. I'm not really worried about poems being scientific, you know, documents.
No footnotes.
No footnotes.
Okay, those are the questions for someone else.
I could try them.
Well, they're for a fantasy novel.
Oh, sorry.
Set in a land where the mountain flips people up. No, okay. That's Samantha Baco's launch, and she will be launching her book next week. So you should go see that. It's good. I'll also be hosting. It'll be like you never left. So how do you write about climate? This is what I was saying. How do you write about climate without resorting to data or overwhelming people with dread and anxiety, right? Like, do you think nature writers, all writers now, have an obligation to take on climate in some way?
I don't know if it's an obligation for writers. I mean, I think it's an obligation for all of us to take it on in our lives. So it makes sense for writers to do that through their work. And I think your genre is going to dictate a little bit in terms of the research you do or how you present it. Again, I'm mostly just writing about experience, my own, and that very narrow, that very kind of small world. So, you know, I write about things I'm seeing and thinking about, but I don't necessarily feel an obligation as a writer, more as a person, I guess.
So how did your writing process change after having a child? Because you and Jopi had been together for a long time before you had Scout, right? So you'd settled into a life and a house and a series of sweaters and jaunty knitwear. She has very jaunty knitwear. Some of which was provided to us by Alison Calder.
I was just talking about it last week.
Yeah.
You know what? My writing life is so much more focused and productive than it was before I had a child. And I think it was having that time constraint and just knowing I've got 45 minutes until she wakes up. Like, I've got to get something down on a piece of paper, or I mean, when she started sleeping through the night, like, you know, you've got different amounts of time, but it really made me use my time a lot better. And also, like, I had more stuff to write about. So that kind of helped too.
Okay, so that poem of yours, as we mentioned, was shortlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize. Now, the hoopla happened while you were editing this book. So was that reassuring or deeply weird? Like people are like, oh, you're so good, Kerry Ryan. And you're like, no, oh, my poems are terrible.
Well, there was some of that, but not really related to the like CBC stuff. I mean, it's nice to get the recognition like at any time, and it kind of maybe helps to balance off some of those other feelings I was having about the manuscript. But yeah, I mean, I guess it felt like a bit weird, especially since my editor had like just recommended that I cut that poem from the manuscript. Like, no. Okay, but you don't know this, but I know, and I'm not about to tell you yet, but other people think it's good. But then in the end, it didn't end up making it in, which was entirely my choice by that point, but it just didn't fit as well. And I wasn't as willing to edit it as I was the other poems. And it had its own life, so it did its own thing. Yeah.
So what are you working on now? Tell us what you're writing now.
Oh, well, I've been trying to write a novel for many years, so I'm still kind of trying to do that, but it's hard. Novels are long, and I don't know. Yeah, so that's in the works. It's on the computer. I don't know if it'll ever get off the computer. And then starting to write poems again. It was kind of weird after submitting the final draft of this manuscript, and you kind of know this space. It's like, what am I doing now? And then you kind of have to like feel like you're starting over. There's, hundreds of poems on my computer that didn't make it into this manuscript. They're probably not going anywhere else. I better start writing some new stuff. So
hundreds of poems.
Probably. Well, not good ones. I mean, I still save everything.
I mean, you don't burn all your, you're not the romantic poet who burns all their reject
drives.
Yeah, in the backyard,
Yeah.
in your garden.
No, I like the idea of that, but I never do it.
Yeah, I think you'd have to get a burn permit.
Maybe.
Anyways, all right. Should we go to questions from other people? John, are you gonna come from behind the Wizard of Oz curtain?
There it is.
See, he's literally hunched back here like an ogre.
Thank you, Ariel. So with that in mind, if you do have a question for Kerry, please just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with this microphone. And again, if you are watching on YouTube, just write your question in the comments and we'll get to you there. Were there any questions?
I really enjoyed this, Kerry, and I was wondering how Scout feels about being the subject of so many of the poems.
Here. Well, right now her face is turning bright red. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to answer for Scout, but when my box of books arrived from the publisher a couple of weeks ago, it came one day while she was in school. And as soon as she got home, she opened the book and just started reading it cover to cover. So I took that as a pretty good sign. But yeah, maybe you can ask her after and she'll tell you how she feels.
When my book of pregnancy and mothering came out, my daughter was 4 years old, and someone came up to me at the launch and said, "Where's Anna?" I'm like, "She's in the trunk of the car." Like, of course she's not here. She's 4 years old and there's lots of swearing in my book. So she was at home, but people were like, "Oh, how dare you not have the child that this
On
is written."
display.
I know, yeah, for us to like pet. And someone also congratulated me on my baby. Congratulations on having a baby. I'm like,
At your book launch?
at my book launch, as though they happened simultaneously.
Right.
But yeah, the 10-year-old a little different. Yeah. Questions?
I have a question about humor, because I find your writing very visceral and sort of poignant, but I also find it really funny. And I'm wondering if you are intentionally realizing the humor as you're writing, or if you are writing visceral, sad things that end up becoming hilarious when you look back and realize that you've made it through.
That's a good question. I think that maybe is a little bit about like my writing style more recently, where like a lot of the time I feel like I'm just writing about something like incredibly absurd that I feel like I have to write down because otherwise, nobody will ever know this weird thing happened. And I think humor too is a way of dealing with some more difficult subject matter in a way that makes it maybe a little more accessible, or is like a little bit of a spin on something that you wouldn't normally see. I mean, I feel like there's this conception of what motherhood is supposed to be, beautiful and like all good times, and you're maybe a little tired, but like whatever, everyone's supposed to do it, and like nobody really talks about like the tough stuff and the parts of it that kind of suck, and so nobody's really doing that, but nobody's really like trying to be funny about it either. So I don't know, I'm glad that you found that you found some humor in those poems, because I was hoping that people would see some of just the weird, absurd, and like in the end you just kind of have to laugh at it kind of stuff. Hello.
Such beautiful writing, seriously. I just wanted to know a little about the cover art.
Do you?
Because it's a beautiful cover, and I wanted to know about how that came to be.
I am just so thrilled with this cover, and with Frontenac Press, who negotiated the use of this beautiful image by artist Julie Morstead. She's a Vancouver-based illustrator. She's done lots of kids' books, which is how I first came to know her work. We have some of her books at home. And she does a lot of other stuff too that's a little bit more edgy, but her style is so beautiful and kind of haunting, and I am just over the moon that I was able to use this image on my cover. Thanks for asking about it.
Were there any other questions at all? I was personally a little curious just about influences, both on this collection and on your working.
I almost got through this with nobody
She
asking
hates
me about
that question, John.
I realize that's often the case, but you already asked the dreaded, so what are you working on now question.
Oh.
That's true. I don't know, influences, I struggle with that question. I'm reading all the time, kind of whatever I can get my hands on. Poetry-wise, I'm often reading books by folks I know, folks in this room. Right now I've got the other Frontenac authors' books on my bedside table, so I've been kind of dipping into those. In terms of influences, I don't know. I don't try to write like anyone else that I'm reading, but I am just reading all the time.
Thank you, and sorry.
That's all right. I knew it would happen.
What you have to do is think on it at home and then write them
Prepare
on your
something.
hands.
I know.
And then you'll be like, oh, of course, I'm influenced by the blibbity blue of so-and-so.
I know, I had a busy week. I don't have to write notes. I don't know what the problem was with the water slide, if it's my body or the
So it ran out of
dynamics.
water?
There was like no angle. It was completely dark, like the tube kind. It was possibly the worst experience of my life. Yeah, I don't know. There was not enough water, is all I can say. Has anybody else gone down that water slide? Anne? Yes? Okay. It's a bad time. And there's no warning.
Okay, so I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how you came up with the title of the book.
Yeah. Well, I wrote the title as the title of a poem, just because I also thought it was kind of funny. And I sort of liked that it was long and cumbersome. But also, like, when you have a little kid, they get sick a lot and they can't tell you what's wrong. And you've just got to try to figure out what these weird symptoms might mean. And you're either like reading online in the middle of the night, or you're talking to a nurse on the phone and they're just asking you like all these ridiculous questions that you had never even thought to like worry about or think about. And then you have to try to figure out if your kid has the thing when they can't, you know, tell you anything about it. So I just was looking for a title that to me kind of got at that just like funny and absurd and weird type of expertise you're expected to have when you have a kid.
But there's a couple of like titles that are sort of Googled that way, that are like search strings, like search results for what you call a group of robins.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of awesome. And then there's another one that I was trying to find.
Yeah, there is another title like that. Googling when to wean.
Googling when to wean.
You Google a lot of things when you have a small child, partly because you want to find somebody else that has had the same weird thing happen to them. So then you Google these very specific things. There's something that happens with babies called sleep regressions, which is what you just blame anything on. Oh, it's a sleep regression. It's the 3-week sleep regression. Oh, it's the 7, like every possible amount of weeks you Google sleep recession, somebody has regression, somebody has posted on that thing, which makes it seem like it's maybe not a thing. It's just kids don't sleep.
Or they sleep irregularly.
Yeah.
Or they're just constantly growing. And so things are shifting all the time.
I don't know anything about them.
Well, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Ariel Gordon.
Can we give Kerry Ryan like another round of applause? Is it over? John, it's over.
The beautiful chaos of having Ariel Gordon personally. Thank you all so very much. Once again, I'm going to make you applaud for Kerry one more time in a second, so be ready for that. Oh, not yet. So we are going to move Kerry along to the signing table now. So please do feel free, once she is situated, we will let you know, and you can then wander over and get books signed.
I'm a fast walker.
We have books at the table there, so you can get it signed before you pay for it, or you can pick up a copy at the cash desk first. Just please do pay for the book sometime tonight. And thank you all so very much once again for coming. It's an incredible book. I can't wait for you all to read it if you haven't already. Thank you again, Frontenac House. Grudging thanks to Ariel for hosting this evening. And please join me one final time acknowledging Kerry Ryan.
I have one last question. Why are you so good?